Good morning and welcome to this public roundtable together for the future of Europe. Our theme today is digital transformation in the European way. I'm Brian McGuire, I'll moderate today's event. Digital transformation is affecting economic, political and social life in the European Union and globally. But can we create clear guiding principles for tech development? Is the data-driven society risking a new inequality? And should digital health be a compulsory part of education for all? To open the debate on these fundamental issues, the EP Former Members Association has organised this roundtable jointly with the Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies, the European Progressive Studies Foundation, the European Liberal Forum, the Green European Foundation, and the European University Institute. Now, let me hand over to Hans-Gert Puttering, President of the EP Former Members Association. Good morning, Hans-Gert.
Brian McGuire, dear guests, colleagues, and friends, on behalf of the European Parliament Former Members Association, I want to welcome all our colleagues, the former parliamentarians. I want to welcome the public, which includes many university students and, of course, professors. Our association has the ambition to reach out to and involve citizens, in particular the younger generation, promoting a plural debate on the European development with the support of the academic institutions and the expertise of our European former parliamentarians. Thus, our cooperation with the European political foundations and the European University Institute is extremely important to multiply our efforts. We discuss today on a very challenging and topical theme: digital transformation in the European way, ? The European Commission has been working hard on digital matters over the last month and has recently published a series of documents to address this issue on a European level in strategic fields. Our discussion is very timely, I think. We need to continue this debate on fundamental and complex issues and raise awareness among the European public. This is the only way to build a free and informed consensus about future developments and decisions relating to the so-called digital revolution. There is no area of human life, be it healthcare or education system, that is not happening online, at least partly. Data is today everywhere, and we all need to be architects and in control of the development of our future communities and economies. We need to become ourselves supporters of the digital era. But I am deeply convinced that nothing can replace human relations and meeting in person, because only if human beings meet in person, trust can be built. And I think this is very necessary for human beings and for the world of the future, that we build a world of understanding. And for this, the digital world is not enough. We have to meet in person. So I am now eager to listen to our experts and look forward to an interesting and informative debate with them and our public. And I want to thank Brian McGuire, who is so experienced leading these conferences, and with his great intellectual capacity, we are now looking forward to listen to you and to your moderation, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was massively oversold. So now you've raised expectations far too high, Hans-Gert. Thank you. Okay, let's get on with our first panel this morning, democracy and digital transformation. So we're going to be talking about new digital ethics and human dignity, data control and security and privacy, freedom and non-discrimination, citizens' participation in new digital political arena, and representative democracy and transparency. So we have 4 speakers this morning, and first each will be asked to speak for about 3 minutes, just to give an overview of what the specialism is and their key message for today. And then we'll begin the general discussion on this topic. I encourage you to send in your questions using the Q&A as well. We'll bring some of those in for the panel discussion, and then we'll save the rest for the Q&A session later on as well. So let me introduce first this morning Professor Ulysses Cortes from the University Polytechnica in Catalonia. He's Professor of Artificial Intelligence, coordinator of the Ethics WP in the AI for EU platform. Good morning, Ulysses. How are you? So you have 3 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
So, well, I like to thank the organization for this invitation to participate. Also to greet the other participants, members of the table. It is a great honor to share this opportunity with you. It has been said, I'm an AI professor, and in the recent years, I devoted much effort to studying the ethical, legal, socioeconomic, cultural, and gender aspects of the use of AI. One of the topics that interests me the most is the possible impact of the uses of AI on human rights and by extension on democracy. It's just serendipity that today this event occurs during the Human Rights Day celebration. The artificial intelligence revolution brings unique opportunities to help improve the life of citizens, but also new unknown threats. I don't have any doubt of the potential transversality of AI. In the last decade, there has been an explosion in the progress and applications of AI in our society. We have seen and see positive and negative uses in a multitude of settings. What is more paradoxical is that the more successful, the easier to use AI is, the more invisible it becomes. Citizens become skilled and avid users, but are unaware of the real functioning of the technology at hand. This situation makes it simpler to control users who are satisfied with the technology and the services, but are unconcerned about what is possible to do at all the times of their personal data and the aggregation of this data with those of a multitude of other users. It's clear that GPDR and the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence guidelines for a trustworthy and human-centric AI are helping to change the situation in the European context. Still, in the rest of the world, things are not so promising. Among the many transformations caused by AI technologies in the global economy, none is more salient than the growth of internet platforms. Alibaba, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, that were already dominant before the COVID pandemic, have become more and more prevailing during these times. And as much of the ordinary life is going online, they are more and more present there. How these companies govern information flows and their economic capacity poses new threats to a well-functioning democracy, and we are seeing this all the time. It is also true that the citizen response to this domination is novel, and sometimes you use those same infrastructures to organize and give collective responses long before governments are doing. When you are using AI-based technologies, having human oversight is not an option. It has an impact on living beings and on the environment, and we have to be there. The problem is how we supervise these technologies, how often, how many agents will do that. We have to tell that AI is not an independent entity. It is only an intellectual creation that has a big, real economic value, but it's also almost unregulated technology and used on purpose by individuals, companies, and government. AI has no moral or legal responsibility, but humans have. Therefore, I urge policymakers and the scientific community to embrace and address the challenges from an ethical point of view. As readily as we are exploring the fascinating and exciting new uses of AI-based systems. In this scenario, to achieve technological sovereignty at a European level, technical education for all citizens is a must. We have to ensure governments must be the first in this effort to get population is digitally literate and uses digital technologies in a conscientiously and responsibly way. Not only be simple users, but really know the tools.
Okay, 30 seconds.
One step in this direction is to advance in digitization of primary school teachers. Thank you.
Okay, I precipitated just a moment too early. Thank you so much, Ulysses. Okay, our next speaker this morning is Sven Johan, member of the European Parliament. She's a member of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in a Digital Age. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm very good. I'm sorry. I hope you're not hearing the reconstruction work in my house. So
no, but if you want to give us a tour later,
my pleasure. Sometimes
floor,
I have man walk in front of my windows because they're redoing the facade.
It beats having screaming kids in the background today. Anyway, thank you. Listen, you have 3 minutes. The floor's yours.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me today. I think the topic we want to discuss today is of utmost importance, and it really matters what we're going to do in this legislative period, because it's really up to shaping the future of Europe. And we talked about it a lot in the last half a year. The two top priorities of the Commission are the Green Deal and digitization. And now in this health crisis, in this economic crisis, it's not only about building back our economy, but setting them on the right track for the future. And Green Deal and digitization need to go hand in hand. And we need to set the framework. And for me, as a European lawmaker, of course, it's the question, how do we set a legal framework, a framework that fosters and allows for innovation, that doesn't narrow this down, that doesn't tend to overregulate what is already in place, but actually sets a good framework from an ethical, from a juridical standard for new ideas to foster. It's not about copy pasting what we already know from big American companies. It's about making and fostering innovation made in Europe, fostering technology, supporting new areas, for example, in the area of Industry 4.0. I think especially European industries could be actually those leapfrogging over others. So we as lawmakers want to look into how can we do this? What do we need to regulate? And I mean, all these new technologies and innovations are not completely coming into a blank space. We already have a lot in place. For me, it's more about taking a look into the details. Where do we need to maybe adapt to the new characters of artificial intelligence? Where do we need to adapt our rule book? And where do we maybe need to ease in the pressure a bit? So this is really what we're going to do, and with the Commission, but of course with the Parliament as well, setting framework for artificial intelligence, setting a strategy with access to data as well, and creating a fair playground, a fair competition framework in the digital area. And I'm very looking forward to the discussion today.
Sven-Johan, thank you so much. Excellent overview. And let's go to Ziga Turk. He's a professor at University of Ljubljana and academic council member at the Martens Centre. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Great to have you with us. You have the floor. 3 minutes.
Yeah. Actually, my background is not so much into politics as it is in engineering. I teach, of all things, design communication, and what we are seeing in the history of engineering is that more complex buildings were the results of more people working together, with more specialists being brought in. So specialization and collaborations throughout the history of humankind has been essential, and institutions emerged that enabled this increased number of people to collaborate. And we somehow evolved from a kin-based society to a society of individuals. And the trick has been, maybe the European trick has been the collaboration of strangers, trusting strangers, creating institutions that allow for collaboration of strangers. Once that institution is market, political market is also such an institution, like democracy. And these institutions were kind of shaped by technology, but they were also shaping technology. And democracy is a system that enables collaboration of strangers, creates trust among strangers, creates trust among individuals, and these individuals are free to be innovative, to use knowledge. It's a great system to drive innovation, which happened in Europe over the last 500 years. It is not such a great system for people to obey rules, which is happening during the COVID pandemic. If you compare the European and the Chinese response, we invented a lot of vaccines, but are not so very good at obeying lockdowns, etc. Democracy, as we know it, is a child of paper and press technology. You cannot have a democracy without the press, without the media, without people knowing, without people learning, without people reading. And my point to this, my main point probably to this debate is that you cannot have a political system holding back technology. It was not proper, it did not work for feudalism to hold back printing press because it was a novel thing that made possible a different kind of political system. Democracy is not the last system that we have. It's not the final goal. It's not a goal in itself. It allows the thriving of people. It will be replaced by something else that allows even more thriving of people. I think the examples of these new elements of systems are already present in business, in civil society, in NGOs. In NGOs, we just don't know which one will succeed. And the strength of Europe historically has been trying in different ways. To paraphrase Roger Scruton, we were in Europe always competing with each other, even fighting wars, but we somehow knew we fit together. And this European way, empowering individuals, exploring in different ways, allowing for creativity, allowing for collaboration, allowing for the individual countries even to try in different ways. That worked in the past, and I think that should be a model of the future.
Thank you. Some flexibility, some really interesting comments there. We'll get back to a little bit later on. Thank you so much, Ziga. Richard Wouters, he's a researcher for the think tank of the Dutch Green Party and in the Bureau and the Green Links as well. Good morning. How are you, sir?
Fine. Thank you, Mr. Maguire.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. I've written a charter for the smart city for the Green European Foundation, and that's probably why I was asked to sit on this panel. And I'm very honored to be here. Digital transformation in the European way, in negative terms, means avoiding both surveillance capitalism and state surveillance. In positive terms, it means the digital transformation should be citizen-centered, fully respecting their fundamental rights. As President Puttering said, we need to be in control. This distinction between surveillance capitalism, state surveillance, and a European way is, of course, quite familiar, setting the EU apart from the US and China. Both the European Commission and national governments like to say that they put citizens at the heart of the digital transformation. The question is, are they really willing to do things differently than the US and China? Let me give an example. Increasingly, governments use large amounts of personal data and algorithms to give risk scores to citizens. The idea is, for instance, to identify potential welfare fraudsters. Governments always tell us not to judge individuals on the basis of group characteristics, but that's exactly what these risk score algorithms do. They're prone to discrimination. They may have a chilling effect on citizens. Every contact you have with the government, every piece of information you give them may be fed to an algorithm and used against you. I don't think the European Commission approach on AI does enough to stop this kind of citizen risk scoring. The European Parliament's position is more promising. Second example, some governments in Europe are experimenting with biometric surveillance. Cameras with live facial recognition start following us in the public space. This has a huge impact on our privacy and autonomy. It's like having a stalker after you. Yet both the European Commission and the European Parliament have shied away from proposing a ban on biometric surveillance. And I would like to point out that citizen scoring and biometric surveillance are two key elements of the Chinese social credit system. The main difference is that in the EU we still have the rule of law to keep such systems in check, but even the rule of law is under attack in some member states. So a European way of digital transformation starts with better protecting fundamental rights. They should also be protected against surveillance capitalists. I was very happy that the European Parliament proposed a ban on personalized advertisements or micro-targeting, but this has not been followed up by the European Commission in its recent democracy action plan, unfortunately. Personal data should not be the raw material for state surveillance, nor should it be treated as a commodity, which can be bought and sold by commercial and political marketeers who want to manipulate us. If the EU is serious about breaking the dominance of Facebook and Google, a ban on the trading of personal data would be a good start. Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much. And thank you to all our panelists for excellent introductions. Richard, let me start with you in terms of what you said about biometric surveillance and whether, let me put the question to you about tech neutrality. Is technology neutral?
No, it's definitely not. It impacts our values, in many cases at least. Only look at the way the algorithms of social media platforms amplify polarization and disinformation. Different algorithms or a different business model would produce different results. These algorithms could also amplify journalistic news, for instance, from a variety of independent media outlets.
But what does that matter in the public realm? Why
that would improve the quality of our public debate and ultimately the quality of our democracy, I think.
So do you see a way to make it neutral?
No, I think it's always it's always impacting our values, and that's why we should clearly formulate the values we want to be protected or promoted by technology beforehand, and also have a public and political debate on it, because of course public values can clash.
Yes, Sven Johan. Svenja, if we can't have a tech-neutral environment, and we'll talk a bit more detail about this, you spoke about adapting our rule book and having a fair approach to how we deal with this. Can we legislate to create a tech-neutral environment, or do we just have to deal with the worst excesses of the breach? For example, biometrics. The algorithms are still wildly inaccurate, and they tend to be programmed by white middle-class people with a bias against often people of different ethnicities. And so the profiling and how they're used has a disproportionate impact. You know, in Netherlands, for example, there's a massive study in this where the police surveyed 400,000 people, I think it was, and the failure rate was something like 95% on it. So how do we create a new rule book, or how do we adapt the framework as you describe it for a tech-neutral environment?
First of all, technology is not per se neutral, neither is it per se discriminating. Technology is an outcome of human creation. And it doesn't matter so much who is the human that's creating it. For example, when we look at artificial intelligence, there are developments, not machine learning, where technology goes beyond human creation. And for that, it's important to avoid discrimination by setting the right legal framework, for example, by ensuring that unbiased data sets are used for training such algorithm. This is what is more important, to avoid that maybe discrimination that exists in society is repeated. But the technology itself is not so much that problem there. It's about how we humans feed it with that. And so we need to look into what kind of clear guiding principles can we create for tech development. I think in general, we already have clear guiding principles for all kind of products, not only for tech. So above all of that, we have the treaties of the European Union in which our values are enshrined. And these are our guiding principles for every legal framework that we're creating. And of course, these European values also need to be applied to a European understanding of tech development. And this reflects, for example, in the GDPR, in the already existing product liability directive that protects and empowers consumers. And if we transfer this to the example of regulation on AI, there we need to negotiate about that. And for example, in my opinion, there are clear borders, like we should not allow technology made in Europe to be used for mass surveillance in China, for example. And neither should we go, in my opinion, towards an American approach, which is for protection of personal data and privacy. So I think we really need to look into finding a European approach And for this purpose, really, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, it's not like this is wild, wild west, and it's the law of who's stronger. And that this means a European way, supporting innovation, development of new technologies, ensuring highest possible level of privacy, no mass surveillance, preventing abuse of data and discrimination. And I think then we're on a good way towards new technology developments, and especially AI developments.
Thank you. Ulysses Cortes. Ulysses, do you think what Svenja said is realistic, or is it that's the starting point? How do you think it's possible to have a reasonably tech-neutral environment, and one where the quality of the human input is measured against our European values? Because if we put the wrong data in, we get the wrong kind of results in terms of European values as well. So how do we balance that?
Well, first, one thing, machines do not discriminate. Machines classify. It's very strange to tell that there are biased databases. What is, we have bad format databases that were created by people that is not expert or have a purpose to have a bias. But it's not that data is biased by itself. So we are mixing concepts here. And I believe that will confuse people. And there is really using different levels of precision in language that leads to the lay person to get really confused. So a machine will never discriminate. It has not personality, it has no moral. You can create some purposes for the machine, but they are the purposes that were created for. And basically, it was Professor Waters already told that, well, if you have a bubble filter, has been programmed for that and has a direction to do that. And because there has been no regulation in the creation of Facebook or
this is what Svenja was saying. You know, we have to start with the European values. That's got to shape everything else that we do afterwards.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Are we doing this the wrong way around at the moment? Is that the problem? Is that we're allowing tech to get ahead, the tech industry to go ahead of the framework?
So we are trying to promote ethics by design. But one thing is that we have also to tell people that doing that, it will be more expensive than doing not in the right way. And if we want to have technology that is made in Europe, following our own principles, it will be more expensive than buying in other places. Because we need to test, we have to find that all the environments that is complying with the law, that there won't be no interpretation. So it's clear that for security reasons, we need to have surveillance of a given moment, but it has to be launched in a moment that a judge or someone says that's the moment to be launched. There will be a clear procedure to use the data and then erase the data, and should be someone that is really the person that is taking responsibility for this data. That's very expensive. But people should be aware that security is very expensive. So we need, for a given moment, to have all these installed for the few moments that you are in alert, and then erase it and still live in alert. But we need to decide, and it should be that someone gets into this discussion and everyone at home learns that we have different values in our societies, but we have a common kernel within Europe. And we need to educate people in those values for the creation of the new technology in accordance with those values. Also, we have the capitalist and liberal approach. They will tell you that because there is property, there is freedom. Well, yes, but data is my property and you don't need to use it in an inappropriate way, but they will tell you there is no law to control this, so you get always in the side.
Let me put this as a good circle. So you mentioned some interesting points about democracy is not the only option, or we're looking at democracy 6.0 perhaps as somewhere down the line. In terms of what Ulysses just said, how do you see this this narrative being developed when we talk about our values, when we talk about what democracy really is today, and the ownership of our data, and how our rights are evolving, how the rule of law is currently under pressure in different parts of Europe as well. How do we find our way through this in a way, like Svenja says, which is a common framework which can be actioned?
Again, I think it helps to look at what somehow worked in the past, or what how we did to get where we are right now. I think the question whether technology is neutral is interesting, and you could also rephrase it as whether technology is moral or whether technology is ethical. And here I would stand on a principle which would very clearly say no. It is humans who are moral, it is humans who are ethical, it is Adam and Eve who were eating of the tree of whatever, and they could distinguish between right and wrong. So it's, in the end, it is the people. And there's another interesting passage in the Genesis which says, well, when the God was making the world, etc., he looked back and it was good. And our values, the values that we have, are the values that kind of won in the, let's say, in the fight with other values, and proved to be successful. And because it was successful, we say, now this is valuable. This is our value. If you would want to single out one European value that is very distinctive from the rest of the world, it would be this individualism. It would be this freedom to use as many brains, as many ideas, as many approaches as possible. And I think it would be very dangerous to start copying some other principles where they say, oh, we should all march in this direction. We should prohibit that. We should ban this. No, the strength of Europe was to try in many different ways and then fight it out which way is the best. And there are many, I think there are many obstacles in the way. Speaking about technology being neutral, actually values were kind of co-shaped with technology. Our individualistic values correlate very much to the emergence of reading. You have a beautiful book by Joe Hendrick about the weirdest people in the world. So they kind of go one with the other. And if you stop this mechanism where the values and the technology and the knowledge stops kind of improving each other, I think then we are in trouble. Then we stop and others will go forward. So I'm very much in favor of kind of, permissionless innovation as much as possible. Let's not put sand in this machinery of innovation that is working so beautifully over the last 500 years or so.
Okay, this seems like an evolutionary principle, and the strongest are going to win here. But if we look at this dichotomy that we have,
not necessarily the strongest, not necessarily the most corrupt one or the strongest physically, but we were winning because we were able to collaborate in the best possible way.
Well, let me put it this way: is that we have in the United States, for example, the anti-vaxxers, the anti-maskers at the moment in the United States. This is largely a movement which is driven by artificial intelligence, because the algorithms are driving particular forms of disinformation and news to motivate a particular sector of society. Now, we can take the view that this is an intellectual exercise in freedom, in liberty, because we have the right to decide. But the consequence of that on the other side is that a whole bunch of people die because of the fake science and the lack of restraint on the part of those who accentuate liberty to an absolute. Now, where do we find the common ground? Is the European value that common ground, which is a balance between the maximum right of the individual and the maximum common good? Angela Merkel speaking and last night as well, very passionately about our responsibility. 590 people a day dying in Germany is not acceptable. And so this kind of context, how do we trade that individual liberty, which to a large degree is undermined by false information, and the common good?
If this goes to me, I would say we tend to talk about rights a lot, but you cannot have rights without responsibilities.
Okay.
And we have forgotten a lot about those responsibilities. These responsibilities were implicit when the modern democratic systems were built in Declaration of Independence and Glorious Revolution and so on, even in the French Revolution, this substrate of duties that you have to your fellow man, to your community, to your country, this is somehow missing. Also in our response to the epidemic, if you are responsible, you take measures because of others, not because of yourself.
Okay, Svenja, you agree with that? Rights and responsibilities. Is this time for a new moral revolution to strengthen our democracy? Do we need to rediscover our responsibilities as well as the assertion of our rights?
That's an interesting question. I mean, we're certainly seeing right now very basic discussions. I mean, for me as a liberal, individual freedom is extremely important. And we see like big debates where we're giving up a lot of parts of our freedoms, a lot of our individual freedoms, a lot of European freedoms as well, in order to protect society against this disease. And I think a mistake that we're seeing, not only in Germany, which is my native country, but in many other European countries, that we're having an overpowering executive, and that the parliaments are much less of playing a role. Sure.
Please continue.
Okay. So I think it's really important that we're having this debate in the parliament with this directly elected representatives of the people, and having a broad, open dialogue about what freedoms are we cutting back. And that is the same as well, that we need to have a broad societal dialogue about technology, about what you raised as well, about like democracy, and what was raised already, mass surveillance, the aspect of surveillance, what's called surveillance capitalism, that we need to have a broad dialogue about what we want in digitization and what not. And I think parliaments are the place for having such dialogues.
Okay, Richard Wouters, a societal dialogue that looks at which is worse, surveillance capitalism and its potential misuse, or mass surveillance and its potential misuse as well. Which poison would you prefer?
I think it's both equally killing for our democracy. Yeah. I would agree with...
What's the antidote then?
The antidote, I think, is injecting more of our values into the development of technology. So I agree with Mrs. Hahn that we should have a public debate, a political debate on that, but that of course should also have consequences and be translated into regulation. I don't think I agree with Mr. Turk when he pleads for permissionless innovation. If we're talking about a European model, about value-led innovation, we should also set some limits to the development of technology. Do we want killer robots, for instance? Do we really want political micro-targeting? Do we want deepfake videos that can be used for political manipulation? I think regulations should clearly set limits there. Okay,
Ziga Turk, and then Svenja.
Well, you know, it actually depends how you look at things, or how you define things, or where do you draw the line. But at some point, people would say that Galileo and Kepler and the others were kind of permissionless innovators, and there would be many who would like to stop or silence them. So in the end, I think science will always be looking for answers, and innovation will always be looking and will be developing technologies, but it will be our choice whether we use them or not. A lot of the technologies, for example, for cyber cops and cyber warriors, etc., it's exactly the same technology that you need at construction sites for people for androids to build stuff. So how do you use it is the trick.
Okay, I want to come to the question, is it our choice, a bit later on. Sven, you wanted to reply to that, and then Ulysses.
Yeah, I wanted to add on that. Of course, mass surveillance on one hand is highly undemocratic. One of our core values is the protection of fundamental rights and freedom of the individual. And that is the opposite of mass surveillance of citizens. And in Europe, freedom of the individual is our highest good. And I mean, fortunately, we overcame dictatorship and mass surveillance of the past. And that is one of the biggest achievements of our shared European history. And well, some politicians in the EU, especially some conservatives, might see it in a different way. But I'm very strongly opposing any attempt of extensive surveillance of citizens by governmental bodies. And on the other hand, that was raised as well with the so-called surveillance capitalism, which means data processing by companies. And likewise, for the protection of our citizens, we have to set limits and especially empower consumers to decide what they want to allow when it comes to their personal data. But I'm not in favor of, for example, forbidding everything like targeted advertisement, but we need to empower the consumer to decide if they want their data to be used for something like that. So we have to really defer there and really look at what it is. And I think what really matters is that we set high standards of privacy protection, like the GDPR, for example, that has to be respected both by governments and by private actors.
Ulysses, thank you, Sven.
I totally agree with that. There's no difference here. I mean, we have to uphold the equality before the law. Regardless of what we happen to learn or what we happen to know or what kind of data has been scanned. On the other hand, I would not give up, the anonymized data that we could gather on people, on population, on their health status, on their moving patterns, etc. I'm stressing anonymized, and learn from that and deploy artificial intelligence pattern matching on this and find out something useful about what is going on. Also, in terms of targeted advertising, personally, I prefer that I'm targeted with adverts that are useful to me than with adverts that are just random. But that's the easy part.
Unless you, like me, have let your kids use your profile for choosing Christmas presents, and now I'm getting all sorts of things for teen girls on my website links. So thank you, Facebook, for that. And let's talk about, and this brings us to, is it our choice, Ulysses? Go ahead, Ulysses.
Well, you see, two things. It's very by chance this morning I was teaching in my course on ethics about autonomous weapons, right? So I don't see that there is any comparison between autonomous cars and that is one of the possible applications of AI and autonomous weapons, right? Stuart Russell said that it's easier to do the autonomous weapons because you only need to kill. The objects that machine identifies, even if they are persons, are just objects. In the autonomous cars, you identify in persons. They are not objects anymore in movement. So there is a big difference in the way you choose in what you invest your money to do science. Of course, you have responsibilities. And of course, because you have responsibilities, you have to decide which are the questions you want to answer on where the technology that you are creating has to be used. Any technology has double use, right? And that's why we started with this idea that technology is no neutral. But again, will be the person formulating the question and opening the answer. As a matter of fact, there is one answer by one of the big bosses on the American Army saying that it's not really a good answer to have autonomous weapons, but if we are not doing it, someone else will be doing it. And it's just an escalation of things. So I don't believe that we need to answer all questions. We need to answer most of the questions and create technology, well-designed, for the good of the people. And what we are looking is that there is responsibility in the use of technology.
Okay.
And that's the most important thing. But I believe that we have to return in a way of education that we educate people first in the responsibility and then on the rights. Because I believe that you first have the responsibility and then you get the rights. And the way governments are focusing, the way you are investing in science and education also is creating a deviation. Of course, that Google can address you advertising, but why they have to create advertising after your emails? That is what Google is doing.
Or your Instagram feed, or your WhatsApp chats.
Whatever. So it's impossible. So, and the most important thing is that it was a technology that was created for a military service that was then, without any regulation, used. Now we are trying to regulate the beast, and it will be very complicated. But we have to choose what kind of society we want in the future. There is a question about parliamentary democracy.
Yeah.
Of course, technologies can be used to improve parliamentary democracy. But I want to see which government will be happy to give open discussion to citizens face to face with the parliamentary people every week or every 2 weeks.
Okay.
It will change the way you do policy.
Let me ask Richard on this issue of, is it our choice, Richard? Do we really get a choice at the end of this if we're dealing with a digital environment where our data points are maybe 4,000 or more data points for each individual is able to shape the discussion, shape our echo chamber to such a degree that we can be nudged in a particular direction for policy benefit as well. And this manipulation of data is not designed to make massive shifts. It's designed to move a small notch on the dial with a sufficient number of people that the policy agenda moves, that the commercial agenda moves. So do we really decide? And in terms of democracy, what impact does that have?
I think the GDPR shows that regulation can have an impact. It even shows that the EU is still able to set global standards. Do we have an influence as individuals? Can we really decide what all these data points that companies gather about us are used for? I don't think so. The GDPR requires free, informed, specific, unambiguous consent for the use of our personal data. If we consent to being tracked by cookies or in another way, are we really able to oversee what the consequences are? For instance, the fact that our data can also be used for psychographic micro-targeting. That means political marketeers playing into our fears and prejudices to manipulate our political opinions. I don't think so. That's why I would support the proposal by the European Parliament to ban micro-targeting, at least for political purposes.
Svenja, can you draw the line there? Is it, Cambridge Analytica and the Brexit campaign is a good example, and also Cambridge Analytica's work in the United States. Is it really possible to separate out micro-marketing of this nature when it comes to political impact and commercial impact? Because there's a massive overlap between the two, is there not?
Well, it's no secret that I voted against that proposal because I find it not leading to the right goal. I think as Democrats, we all share the goal that we do not want false and misleading information, especially around politics or election-making processes. But we clearly need to differentiate between, especially online, what is illegal and what is harmful content, and the talking about micro-targeting is very specific as well. And I think it's important to have transparency. For example, that you no longer have so-called dark ads that only those that are targeted with this can see that, but it's like visible in a library, that it's publicly visible. And I think it's not leading to the cost. To me, it's as well a bit dangerous cutting down of freedoms, and it's a dangerous cutting down of the right of businesses to operate. And I mean, we have other a possibility as well in the outside digital life to target people as well. So I think we should have like a very specific approach. But I mean, if we're talking about, I mean, this is what it's ultimately driven to, is like data-driven society risk. Is it leading to problems? And I think it will only lead to problems and issues as inequality if we allow it to. And that is why we should set a framework. We might disagree.
Well, what do you mean by inequality? How does inequality grow?
It's inequality, of course, is like access to information, participation, and especially in leading knowledge. And of course, you need to address that in the beginning. And for that, it's important that we have, when we talk about data, that we have a good framework. And that is, of course, preventing abuse of data, which is currently on the way with the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act to be published next week by the Commission on the 15th. And what we already touched upon, discrimination through data. So the bias-free data sets, and that is something we're dealing with in the negotiations about an ethical framework of AI, for example. So there are, of course, risks of new inequalities or like deepening already existing inequalities. But I think this also means to balance and fight against this. And I think what was already said, there's consensus in the European Parliament that we try to prevent inequalities wherever they may occur. But that does not have to do with the technologies themselves per se, but with the inequalities in our societies that already exist. And I think this we need to tackle on a much broader basis, not only by setting rules for digital technologies, but its underlying issues in our societies.
Zigatur, how would you respond to that? Is it really our choice? This manipulation of micro-targeting using our data. Do we get to decide what we think ultimately? And as a consequence, is our democracy and our individual choice in that democracy as free as we would like to think it is? Because there's an imperceptible element with our online life and the psychology behind that and the manipulation of our psyche as well to shift one direction or another, and consequently, like I said earlier, to shift policy or commercial interests one direction or another. So do we really decide?
Well, the way I see democracy is that is currently the best trust-building system that we have to put the society together, to acknowledge that there is somebody who is taking our taxes and policing our streets and commanding the lockdowns, etc. And if this is a trust-building mechanism, we need to trust the process through which this system works. And indeed, micro-targeting, various kinds of tricks, Cambridge Analytica, the power of Facebook, even the hijacking of the media or unbalanced and not fair or whatever skewed media. This all contribute to the impression. It does not have to contribute to the real situation. It contributes to the impression that this process is not entirely free and not entirely honest, and then you have crumbling trust. And if you have crumbling trust, you have not as good collaboration in a society as you otherwise would have. So I think this issue of targeting is extremely difficult. But what we need to work towards is the impression that people are deciding out of their own free will to the best of their knowledge. And there's another big problem there with information asymmetries, etc., which would take me another 3 or 5 minutes to respond.
We'll see if we can get to that in a moment then. But this was it ever any different? You're looking at this from a historical perspective, and you started very well in this earlier. We had newspapers before. Newspapers were owned by exceptionally wealthy people with huge influence in particularly in the industrial age in the early 20th century as well. And that editorial, that front page headline would shift the nation in one direction or another. And we weren't shy about propaganda or fake news at the early stages. You know, even today we're dealing with pandemic, coronavirus. We had the Spanish flu. The very name Spanish flu was created to deflect the sensitivity to risk within the United Kingdom at the time. It's over there. It's their problem. It's not really ours. And at a time of war as well. So, you know, have the rules changed at all, or are we just using different devices?
I think it is different. And
in which
the
way?
actual difference is that, in fact, we like to think, well, democracy, one person, one vote, everybody equal, everybody has the equal say. In fact, to be real, if you want a society to work, you have to give those who are, let's say, smarter or more knowledgeable, more to say. And in the old system, you would have these benevolent elites in the media, in the political parties, that kind of work together and try to shift countries into directions which this elite thought was better. And with the internet, with this thing that you don't have these media gatekeepers anymore, you don't have elites on this level, on the national political level, on the national media levels. This is why you have more and more populism. Even with parties that don't call themselves populist, they would give all kinds of populist promises and free lunches to everyone. And I think it is this lack of some benevolent elite that can be putting us in the future in danger.
Okay, but wasn't it this elite that got us into the First World War, the Second World War, and a whole bunch of Napoleonic wars before that? Is that was the driving force? It was popular sentiment. It was for the greater good. That was the narrative which we're still playing with today.
Yeah, I will give you the typical kind of conservative answer to that. The conservatives view the past as valuable and as something that brought us here, and the present is good. And the progressive would say, but the present could be made even better, and that's why we have to criticize the past. And in this clash of ideas, we somehow work out which future ideas could work and which future ideas couldn't. So yes, indeed, there were wars, but there were also innovations. So the mix of that, brought us to the moon and are bringing us to the Mars and are giving us, the world knowledge in a.
Yeah, well, war is a huge economic stimulus if you're on the winning side as well, but it's not really the best policy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ulysses. This element you talked about killing robots earlier, but cars kill far more people than robots. So let's worry about fixing that for the moment. The decision process that we have here, transparency, as Sven you mentioned earlier as well, is transparency. The element which we talk about but don't really action well enough as well. We talk about GDPR, it's there, but everybody clicks the buttons because they want access to the service. If you called cookies a virus, do you permit this virus to enter your computer? Maybe we wouldn't be so quick to say yes to all those options. So how do we improve this?
Again, there is very the need of different concepts here. So when you talk about transparency, you don't want to see 2,000 lines of code or more.
Sure.
What you need is someone is able to audit that program and tells that it's doing it correctly. That's the first. Regarding the contracts that you use to access to services, I believe that it's a problem of the governments that are not making those contracts very easy to read. One of the most common techniques of these companies is to move pieces around in order there's not two contracts that are the same. But we are pushing to have a kind of identifiers like those that you have in clothing, that you can iron it or wash it or whatever. We need the same, the kind of transparency, the use of your data, where are the servers located, 5 or 6 of those with colors, very easy, like traffic lights. That will be easy to the public to understand. They don't need to do that. Of course, cookies are the best virus you can insert in your computer. So try to use a machine that has all this video where you don't have the data, please. That's the first. And the first thing you asked many politicians is where they disconnect their localization service in their mobile phones. If they don't, then they are giving plenty of information, but you have to do it every time for any app you include. So people has a lot of services, they gain a lot, but you are not really knowing what's going on there because you are not educated to do that.
Okay, but if we take the view that cookies, just for general perception, is the virus, that permissibility that we give, is the technological solution to that a form of regulated antivirus, so that we have a means to disinfect this, which the average consumer doesn't have to wade through the code, doesn't have to read every, that we create a more personalized default position, which gives us a cleaner digital life?
Well, there is a line of research on that, and of course we'll go up there. But there's two things: personal individuals with different machines. So maybe Apple will reject all that kind of tools because we'll be against them. So then you don't buy Apple anymore. And maybe other systems will be easier to manipulate if you have Unix-based services, because it's a common, unique, culturally collective way to do it. It will be easier.
Okay.
But if you have a brand like Microsoft or Mac, you won't do it because they won't allow to.
We have a question we sent in. Sven, maybe you want to take this. So it's from Fabio Barbero, and Fabio says, most personal and commercial users, institutions in EU use foreign, non-EU digital technologies, operating systems, social media platforms, etc. What will be the impact, economic and social, of regulations on EU citizens and businesses if there's no viable EU replacement for these technologies? How do you see this, Svenja?
Well, we need to look at this in different levels. First, of course, that operators need to ensure that the data of their European customers are stored the European way. That's, for example, the Privacy Shield agreement with the EU is kind of lingering at the moment because it was even not ensured that data operated there was treated under European standards. So, of course, we need to, on a governmental level, push for this as well. And that as well means that the consumer has the power to demand to know how the data is stored and processed. And that as well, the European authorities act against companies not treating them in the way foreseen. And then on the other side, we need to look into what are other opportunities. And I think from that perspective, it's important that we can ensure that we have infrastructure that processes data of European customers inside the European Union under European standards. And therefore, it's important that we develop other opportunities. I work with European cloud servers only with my data and with my team to ensure that the data used are under full GDPR compliance. So we need to make it more attractive, but I don't think that the one solution. I'm happy to see that for example, GaiaX project is going into a better and broader direction. In the beginning, it almost sounded like, okay, we're building one government state cloud and that's the solution to everything. So I'm very happy to see that it's going into a much broader direction, because it needs to be a starting point for more European-driven innovation and more place of hosting this here. And this is, of course, a consumer question, but of course, this also goes into the question of cybersecurity, which I saw was already raised in the chat as well. It's a security aspect for our companies, for our citizens, and for our governments.
Okay, thank you. Ulysses, you're nodding enthusiastically there as well. Do you want to add something there? Okay.
Well, I believe that GaiaX is a good advance, yeah, but we need to change dramatically the way. And I believe that we have Linux as the basis, and we can start with Linux. And I don't know why we have to pay a lot of royalties to many companies that do not pay taxes within the European Union. That's another thing. So there is a lot of power in these platforms, but they are not paying the appropriate taxes here.
No taxes, no representation, Apple.
Yes, of course. But and what is clear is that the governments know that they are not paying, and they are doing almost nothing to correct that. And well, they are our representatives.
Okay,
So
Richard.
they have to do something.
Thank you, Richard.
I would support the idea of a European cloud as well. That's where our European values can pay off, so to say, if we manage to make this cloud privacy friendly, open source, secure, and green as well. So if it's really a cloud which reflects our European values, I think it can have a global attraction.
Okay, Ziga, earlier you mentioned something in terms of the elements that are needed for successful democracy as well. And The Economist, I was book just out of hand's reach here, I was show you. And Niall Ferguson, he writes about civilizations, and he talks about 6 killer apps that are necessary for successful civilization, successful democracy, and the knowledge, the open borders for knowledge, that ability to exchange ideas, he says, is core to that. And he gives the example of China locking itself away behind a wall for 1,000 years and why it didn't adapt. And now we see that massive acceleration in cultural change and information capacity. You know, how do you see that balance? You know, Gaia X gives us a capacity to regulate what happens inside Europe. Are we creating a cultural firewall where we become, we exclude other ideas, we exclude other commercial opportunities, or is it too late for that?
Well, no, I think we should not be, we should not be too worried about Europeans using, for example, American software, etc., etc. Europeans are using what is on the market and what currently seems to be best. Also, I think it's a wrong approach to create European cloud or European Google or European Facebook. We should create European, something that does not exist yet globally, and see if that things can compete. And I think we are seeing some elements where somehow the European sensitivity to human rights and tech come together. For example, you have a number of European providers of services which do exist functionally from the States, like Gmail. You have European companies that market themselves as more secure, as more private, like ProtonMail. Or instead of Dropbox, you have something like, I think it's called pCloud, which is European, and they give you all this bundle of GDPR and rights and end-to-end encryption and stuff like that. So I think this is a business opportunity. It is a market opportunity to do something differently and not simply ban all the others out.
Okay. Dinesh Dimitra, he makes a comment relating to this as well. He says, by definition, technology leads the law. Thus, innovation is never countenanced by the law, maybe. EU tech is mostly behind the US and China, but the EU's strength is the 500 million, slightly less now from the 1st of January, 500 million people, consumer spending power for negotiation to change the laws. So this is how we can lead the world. Now, to put this in a different way, we have a massive market here. GDPR has shown that we set the rules. Facebook has to apply that. Every website, if they want to do business in Europe, has to apply GDPR rules to some degree. You know, we can ring fence our democratic values using tech if we choose to do it correctly and still use the American tech. You know, we don't have to limit, but if you want to work in our market, you do it on our terms. Svenja, are we going to get better at doing this? Are we going to get more assertive at doing this? Or is American tech, not to just point towards just America, but tech outside of EU, is it always going to be manipulating way which we just can't get a grip on?
Well, I think we as a European Union has been setting standards for quite some time in various areas. And I mean, I'm as well a member of the Single Market and International Trade Committee. And basically the only area where the EU is a real power is in the trade area. I mean, we're not a diplomatic superforce, we're not a military superforce, but we're a trade superforce because we have a huge single market. And we have
talks though. Is there anything else that you know, even when it comes to military side, it's still the money at the end of the day that gets wars settled. So, you know, are we just not playing our hands strongly enough in the digital arena?
I'm not sure if I get where you're going,
but
but
just in terms of asserting our democratic values, asserting our European values.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, it must be clear. I mean, we need to show clear force against systematic rivals like China, and especially to their use of technology to oppressing their own society, to surveil and social scoring their own society. This cannot be the way for Europe forward. But on the other hand, we see that countries like the US have a clear technological advance right now. And we, of course, need to foster our own model. But I think we should, and now with the Biden administration, to foster a renewed transatlantic friendship and as well sit together and define standards, for example, for AI, setting a shared framework to push forward for it and push forward for more standard setting, for example, on the area of e-commerce in the WTO as well. And this only goes through cooperation. And I see the US more as a partner to us than an enemy. The clear threat is China's approach.
Isn't that the risk? Is that we go, well, they're our friends again now, so let's trust them more. And yet it's not necessarily the government or the administration, it's the legislation which empowers commercial organizations to use the data in a very precise way. And we let our guard down. This is really the essence of part of the security discussion between Macron and your own country as well, but Germany. Do we need to be more sovereign in this? Not closing Europe off, making fortress Europe, but do we need to be more self-contained in our capacity to preserve our values, trusting that administrations outside will come and go? We have to know what we stand for. We need to protect our way of life and not let our guard down depending who the administration is. And to add that further, within the European Union as well, we're happy enough to give our data to governments which we trust. But that government, that administration could change as well, as we've seen increasingly across Europe, so that we're giving permission to use our data today, and that social indexing could be used against us with a different administration in the future. Ulysses.
Yes, that's the case. If you are not be sure that there is a law that says that the data will be staying in the place during a given moment for a given purpose, and then it's erased. And if possible, disaggregated from the machine learning tools. And that's one very interesting issue. So for example, in the GDPR, you can ask for your data is erased from the servers, but we need also to be sure that our data, when it's very special, should be also disaggregated from the machine learning tool. Because if not, even if you take the data, the experience is already there. And that makes life a little more complicated. But again, it's a problem of implementation. Once we all follow the rules to be more secure in the way we produce the data, it's a responsibility of the governments to use the data in an appropriate way, store it to be completely secure, and then erase it when it's the time. That's the issue. But you need to educate the governments to do that all the time.
Okay, Richard.
Again, they can make copies, and yeah, they can. One thing, European cloud. So every time you make anything of cloud, you think that in services, but you are not thinking in the environment. Every time you are using servers to hit in the environment, maybe it's not the best policy.
Okay. Thank you. We're coming close to coffee time, so I just want to keep this short. Richard, I give you 30 seconds, Ziga 30 seconds, and Svenja 30 seconds just for final remarks on digital transformation in the European way. So you can give us your top tip, top recommendation for that. Richard, you first, 30 seconds.
Yes, the European cloud should be a green cloud, energy neutral cloud, no doubt about that. And one way for the EU to really display sovereignty I would say is no longer to consider personal data tradable commodities. Well, if we sell our personal data, we sell our identity, we sell our autonomy. It's like selling organs from our body. So stop seeing personal data as commodities. That would really be a European way of digital transformation.
Thank you. Ziga, 30 seconds. Just unmute, please. There you go.
Firstly, I think that there are limits to what we can do as a big market. Because if this big market is not innovative and does not have purchasing power, it will not be a big market in the future. So we have to innovate. That's number one priority in the sense of digital. The second priority in the sense of digital is we are seeing the internet split into the Chinese version, which will happen undoubtedly. And then there's a question, will there be a European version and the kind of open and free version? So it will be three internets. Or will Europeans and the Americans and the rest somehow work together towards the rest of the internet that will remain common, global, and reasonably protecting human rights, which I think we share with the Americans the basic principles when it comes to that.
Thank you.
I'm definitely in favor of Europeans and Americans working together of preserving this free internet as one entity.
Yeah, we can breathe for a moment. Svenja, 30 seconds, then Hans-Gert wants to give a quick remark before we go to coffee as well. Svenja.
I think we addressed quite a big fears on this panel, and I think we need to tackle all of them. We need to create a sufficient digital infrastructure. We need to tackle the lack of open minds and innovation orientation governments in our societies. We need to tackle the lack of good digital governance. We need better coordination through ministries of digitization. We need to close the legal gaps and legal framework to make it fit for the digital age, especially concerning the governance of data. And we must fight the rise of protectionism. European resilience cannot lead to shutting down our continent and to stop working with players outside EU. We need to work and trade together in order to reach progress and innovation. And if we cooperate with our partners and rely on our own strengths, we're going to lead the way into a digital future.
Svenja, thank you. Hans-Gert. And microphone. There you go. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you now. And now you're off again. Okay, unmute for me. There we go.
Is it working now?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted originally only say a few words of thanks, but now I'm tempted to make some considerations. You are all experts concerning the new technologies. I am not, as most of my generation, but I think the new technologies force us to think about ourselves as human beings. What are we? And I think we have to give each person, each human being, its own dignity. And we are persons, and that means we have a responsibility for ourselves, that's individualism, but we have responsibility for the society as well. So there are two parts of our personality, and I think we have to defend that. And my second remark is European values. And one of the European values is the rule of law. But the rule of law is connected with freedom. You have the rule of law in China as well, but it's a communist rule of law. And so we have to see the rule of law as part of our values always in connection with freedom. And my last point is democracy. Of course, democracy means that the majority can decide in politics. But democracy does not mean that the majority can do everything what it wants. We have to defend minorities, and this is part of our European way. And if our European way would not defend minorities anymore because you say the majority can do what the majority wants to do, then we are not defending our European values. And I think the new technologies, the new media, the social media force us to think about these fundamental questions of our being a human being.
Excellent, thank you. It's a great summary to conclude on just before we go to coffee. Just to say thank you to all our panelists, Ulysses, Ziga, Richard, and Svenja, for great contributions, and I really appreciate the differences in opinions today as well. That contributes a lot to how we learn from this.